Hi everyone, this is going to be a short presentation on how to review the student learning outcomes in an existing course with an eye toward what we need to do for the Phase 2 course revisions and writing the proficiency descriptors. So it's going to be a fairly short presentation, I hope, and I will be available for questions in the future. Each class is going to present its own challenges in writing those proficiency descriptors, but we do have some general guidelines. It has to encompass the learning outcomes for the class, has to encompass the learning outcomes for the program, and it has to encompass the institutional core competencies that we have adopted. So the student learning outcomes, the SLOs, describe what the student can do based on Bloom's taxonomy. Those assignments ensure that the student can achieve the outcome by accomplishing a certain task, what we prompt them to do. The proficiency descriptors, on the other hand, describe how well the student does that task. So writing good student learning outcomes is a critical component of making sure that we have good proficiency descriptors. A good SLO is going to break each assignment down into the tasks that the student has to accomplish, and each SLO in that particular module is going to have an assignment tied to it. We only have the SLO being measured one time in the course. So each module will have SLOs that are strictly going to be in that module and not in any other module. Finally, we have to write those outcomes-based assignments. We're going to write summative assignments at the bachelor's level and key graded assignments at the associate's level. Those are going to be in the core curriculum, but for all classes, we want to focus on using scenario-based, project-based, or task-oriented assignments that apply that knowledge and cannot be plagiarized. We are going to use value rubrics, the value rubrics by AAC&U, to base our proficiency descriptors on. We're basically using kind of a backwards design. We looked at those value rubrics and we have a baseline document for the proficiency descriptors. This drives the development of the SLO because the task is broken down into increments. It has to be clear and it has to delineate the different levels of achievement. So the new levels are beginning, emerging, developed, and highly developed. This is an example of the AAC&U value rubrics for critical thinking. You notice it's a little backwards from us. They put their benchmark on the far right and their capstone, which is the highest level, on the far left, but otherwise they basically align. However, we would not be able to fit this into iBoard, and we are not looking at it in such a granularity. So we have taken some of the terms from the value rubrics and we have modified them in such a way that they'll fit into iBoard. But of course you are welcome to use the value rubrics to go by for your own proficiency descriptors as long as we are respectful of the space iBoard allows us. So this is the one for critical thinking. This is the one for information literacy. And here at Allied, we count that information literacy also includes the ability to be technologically competent. So this day and age, information literacy applies just as much to being able to use the internet and the web, because you're not literate if you can't do that in this day and age. So the AAU proficiency descriptors, we use beginning, emergent, developed, and highly developed. The descriptor has to fit in iBoard, as I mentioned. It will become the guideline for the outcome-based rubrics, and we've already developed the maps that help us understand what the course needs to accomplish for our core curriculum. But there are courses that are not included in the core curriculum, i.e. they are not required courses in the student's program. And so for those, we may be doing some mapping. The proficiency descriptors are the small components that describe the goals and tasks at the module and assignment level. And they explain what the student has to do and the degree of success that the student achieves in accomplishing that task. This is an example of the business program learning outcome map. Right now it's only showing reinforced and mastered concepts. The ICCs, the institutional core competencies, are at the top, color-coded. Then the program learning outcomes come next, and they're also color-coded. And then if it is a blank white space, that is not measured in that particular course, so you do not have to have a student learning outcome to it. For instance, oral communication is not going to be measured in Principles of Business Law, Business 230. This is the one for the associates level, and we note that we used different Bloom's taxonomy verbs to differentiate our associates program learning outcomes from our bachelor's learning outcomes. Ideally, you're going to have about 8 to 12 student learning outcomes per course. Generally, more are hard to measure. Keep in mind that you are going to have to write a proficiency descriptor for each SLO. We don't want to artificially restrict you, but each SLO is only going to be measured one time in the course, although you will be using an SLO from the module for the discussion board. So you will select one SLO from that module for the discussion board. Every student learning outcome will have an assignment component to it, and they cannot be vague. They need to reflect those core competencies, reflect the program learning outcomes, and reflect the course level requirements. We also have some additional requirements in the core curriculum. They have to have key graded assignments at the associates level. They would have summative assignments at the bachelor's level, and I will let you know if you have one of the classes that has one of those assignments. There's a separate video on that. Also, I sent out a checklist, or will send you a checklist, to remember the little things like making sure your assignments have Grammarly, that we're having at least one discussion board with a library assignment, that we have at least one assignment with a library assignment, and that if you're using things like YouTube videos, that you have an alternate choice in there that is a written article so that we meet our disability ADA requirements. So the proficiency descriptors describe that level of achievement. How well did the student achieve the outcome? And they also act as a coaching mechanism for the students. So I really like to start with the highly developed and use the one step down approach. So once I get my highly developed proficiency descriptor, then I know that the developed is not quite as good, and then the emerging is less than that, and then beginning is even less than that. It doesn't necessarily mean that they didn't do anything, but it means that they failed at the beginning level. They failed to achieve the outcome. But the proficiency descriptors can also coach the student to success. So if they are emergent, what would it take for them to become developed? And if they are developed, what would it take for them to become highly developed? By the end of their program, we hope that we get at least 80% of our students to achieve all of the outcomes that we have set for them inside their program. They might fail a class, but if they succeed in getting their degree in their program, then we should know that they have accomplished the student learning outcomes, the institutional core competencies, the program learning outcomes. And I do have a master that I can provide for you to use that is a modification of the value rubrics. An example from Marketing 220 is to start with the publisher's material, but a lot of times the publisher's material is written as objectives. It's not written in an outcome format. When you write that outcome, it should describe what the student is able to do. Furthermore, we want to make sure that we really make it clear that the outcomes are tied to the program learning outcomes. So this example in Marketing 220 shows that the student has to use quantitative reasoning skills, and they're going to use that when they compare different pricing strategies for profitability and differentiate them for use in pricing a new product. The assignment has to explain to the student exactly what they need to do based on what it takes to achieve that outcome. The proficiency descriptor will describe how well they do it. But make sure that you give the students sufficient guidance. Do they need to submit a Grammarly report? Is it written in standard American English? Did they use the right citation? How long does it have to be? And really, folks, we've seen some requirements out of students that would require them to write 10-page papers each week. That's really a bit of an overload at a first and second student year level. So we need to make some consideration of that. In addition, it takes our level 100 and level 200 students a lot longer to read material, especially technical material, than it takes an older student. So we need to take that into consideration as well. And that would apply when we do the chat. Then when we write the student learning outcome, as we have here for SLO 7, we want to guide the student to achieve that well. So I find that it helps use a Socratic method and actually ask the student questions. So the example from Marketing 220 for Module 4 is that they're going to develop an Excel spreadsheet, see quantitative reasoning, and for their marketing plan, which is their course-long project. And this discussion is a discussion on their pricing model. There also happens to be an ethical SLO in this particular assignment. You didn't see it here, but we do ask them some questions to show that they understand how to price things ethically. So it worked very well to put ethics into this particular unit because there already was an ethical component in the readings. Back to this example from Marketing 220. This is the proficiency descriptors that was used in iBoard. So when you see you using that step-down approach, the first one really is at the highest level of quality. And at the beginning level, they tried to do something, but they weren't really able to do it in mathematical forms, or they drew incorrect conclusions. Maybe they couldn't use an Excel spreadsheet. Maybe their conclusions are incomplete. They could not really apply the quantitative information, the numbers, to figuring out how to connect that to their pricing decisions. So we remember that highly developed really shows those higher order thinking skills, and then developed shows some of those skills, and then emerging demonstrates, you know, a more limited viewpoint, and then beginning is very, very limited knowledge on the subject matter. Other things that you need to keep in mind is that we have developed super SLOs, and they will work across the entire curriculum. You do not need to develop the proficiency descriptors for that. You just need to select the ones that are appropriate for your course. So if you have problem solving, it could be discrete problem solving, such as 1 and 1 is 2, or it could be non-discrete problem solving, such as write a code for a computer that will solve this employer's business problem, which would be a non-discrete problem solving. We also have them in for written communication and oral communication, and the discussion boards now also have a participation component. There are some other tutorials available for the courses as far as writing key graded assignments and revising our assignments to be competency-based assignments. So if you have questions, please contact me. I am available to you. I don't want to say 24/7, but I do try to be pretty responsive. I don't want you all feeling stuck as you're working on the SLOs or thinking about writing the proficiency descriptors, but I think that you can see the value in trying to keep that at a reasonable level, and each student learning outcome will only be measured once. And that's how we scaffold the class, so that we are moving the student through the levels of knowledge that it takes, so that when you get them to the end of that class, that they've actually learned everything that you want them to learn. I thank you very much for your attention, and please let me know if you have any questions at all.